Hello everyone, and welcome to the 16th rip-off episode of Analyzing Evil, featuring Nikita Dragovich from Call of Duty Black Ops, a man with no fear, no conscience, no weakness. Dragovich is perhaps one of Call of Duty's most detestable, yet compelling villains, and one of the first proper villains in general, during the golden age of Call of Duty games. And given Black Ops 6 is soon to release, let's take a look back to the first major named antagonist the Black Ops sub-series introduced. Dragovich has always been the most interesting to me out of all the campaigns I've played, aside from Raul Menendez, who I think deserves his own video too, but for now, let's focus on Dragovich. Dragovich has always been a simple, but detestable villain, and I think it's worth analysing the possible reasons why Dragovich is the way he is, and how he came to defy the already high moral standards of the Call of Duty franchise. So without further ado, let's begin. We are given minimal details about Nikita Dragovich's origins, which I imagine was by design, because we aren't supposed to like Dragovich, so it's only suitable that we don't know where his villainy comes from. We know he was born in modern-day Volgograd in the Russian Empire on August 10th, 1914. And aside from witnessing the rise of the Soviet Union, not much else is known about his early life, so there's really only speculation we can guess on. If I had to speculate, I imagine he was molded by the changing times of Russia. He grew up during World War I, the Russian Revolution and the Russian Civil War, and given his eventual affiliation with the Soviet Union and its military, I can guess that his early life was shaped by constant war, and it's probably where his lack of empathy comes from, as someone born into violent circumstances will likely be a violent person themselves. I imagine Dragovich very much enjoyed the bloodshed, and never saw a path away from it, and it's why he's shown to have no friends or family. His entire life was war. Again, this is just speculation, but I think it is a very plausible assumption, even if we are in the dark about most of his early life. But I think it's a good way to explain how he is the way that he is. He grew up during wartime and was exposed to the worst violence imaginable, and if anything, taught him that anything was expendable. Throughout the campaign, he is shown to care for no one, and even his loyalty to the Soviet Union can be considered half-hearted, given he is shown to be more concerned with genociding the West. So it's likely that the Soviet Union allowed him to be as corrupt and sadistic as he wanted. This is where we move to the events of Call of Duty World at War. While not mentioned in the game itself, it is mentioned by Viktor Reznov to Alex Mason in Vorkuta in the first Black Ops game that the reason Reznov and his soon-to-be close friend Dimitri Petrenko lost their entire forces during the Battle of Stalingrad was because Reznov relied on Dragovich to send reinforcements, which he specifically promised Reznov. He never sent them, and so Reznov almost lost his life, and by extension losing all of his troops, and it was just him and Dimitri. It can be observed that perhaps Reznov and Petrenko would not have met otherwise, but as we're soon to see, even this would not last due to the direct actions of Dragovich. Reznov mentions how he learned that day that Dragovich was not to be mentioned, but as Dragovich outranked him, he still had to follow his orders. And as Reznov said, he was a soldier back then, and he still believed in orders. The Battle of Stalingrad historically was one of the most bloody battles of the Second World War, and as Stalin ordered not one step back, Dragovich during all this likely used those promised reinforcements for self-serving reasons. If I had to guess, I imagine those reinforcements were directed elsewhere to make himself look good to Stalin, rather than doing the right thing and backing up Reznov. We see in the flashbacks in Black Ops that Dragovich was perfectly willing to collaborate with natural enemies of Russia to advance his own agenda, something which Reznov detested. The dynamic between Dragovich and Reznov is that Reznov was loyal to Russia and the Soviet Union and its values. He, despite being an anti-hero, had a clear sense of honor. Dragovich, on the other hand, never cared about any of that. As I said, I imagine his loyalty to the Soviet Union was half-hearted, as he clearly did not think much of those he outranked who clearly exhibited loyalty to both the country in terms of identity and government. Reznov and Petrenko both valued Russia's history and values, as well as Soviet communism, and that was what Dragovich exploited, as towards the end of the war, he sent both of them and other Red Army soldiers to the Arctic Circle. After getting into contact with Friedrich Steiner, a German scientist wishing to defect from his current government, we see throughout Dragovich's role in Black Ops that any allies he has are just as deplorable as he is. His right-hand man, Lev Kravchenko, murdered his own sister to get into the Soviet army, part of which was ordered by Dragovich himself, but Kravchenko still chose to. And as seen throughout his appearance in Black Ops and Black Ops 2, Kravchenko is a sadistic torturer and subverts any genuine loyalty to the Soviet Union by selling weapons to Raul Menendez. And that's why I would say the same for Dragovich. Dragovich could not care less about Soviet communism, or even Lenin, Stalin, or Khrushchev. Even if he had survived Black Ops and his plan succeeded, he would have eventually betrayed and usurped his superiors. On the other side, Steiner is a cowardly scientist, as he sold out his country and his former allies when making the deal with Dragovich. As it's shown in the Arctic Circle flashback that Reznov and Petrenko were given free rein to kill any of the Germans except Steiner. We also see that Steiner has far from a high opinion of his new allies, as he refers to Reznov as a Russian dog, showing that he has no respect for Russians, and that his defection was mere cowardice. He is also a war criminal just like Dragovich and Kravchenko. And Steiner ended up trying to save his own skin again by cutting a deal with the Americans. A plan that fortunately backfired once Alex Mason got to him. So with that being said, Dragovich did not care whatsoever about who he allied with or who he betrayed. He only worked with Steiner to advance his goals to genocide his enemies, not caring about the cost of innocent lives. After Reznov and Petrenko completed their objective, exactly in the way Dragovich wanted, he then turned on them and shoved Reznov, Petrenko, and 4 other soldiers into adjacent gas chambers, in which we witnessed the tragic death of Dimitri, the soldier we played as in World at War. In the narrative, this is meant to solidify Dragovich and his 2 henchmen as the antagonists. And this is the most detestable, unfair murder Dragovich committed in the game. It can also be inferred that not only did he want to test Nova 6 out on his own troops to see the effects, it was also because he knew Reznov and Petrenko had the potential to outrank them for their actions. And Dragovich knew he had to cut the line and kill them here. And even though Reznov survived, he could easily propagate him, and by extension Petrenko, as traitors to Russia. Either way, it's a win-win. Dragovich is always seen in the background, having the privileged position of seeing his men fight his battles for him, while he reaps the rewards. So Dragovich may actually be as much of a coward as Steiner is, as Dragovich always appears in places where he is guaranteed to be safe. Cuba, Vorkuta, Vietnam, and finally the Numbers Station. He only always comes in directly when he's completely safe from harm, surrounded by his right-hand Kravchenko and numerous Soviet allies. His betrayal had Reznov consumed with the desire for revenge, and Reznov was completely justified in wanting it. Reznov also learned from the experience, as afterwards, his loyalty would be towards his country in terms of traditional values and to his friends, as he entrusted Alex Mason with getting revenge on Dragovich. But I think he was still consumed by revenge deep down. But it was also for a good cause, as Dragovich had to be stopped. With that being said, we arrive to the main events of Black Ops, when Dragovich saves Fidel Castro from Alex Mason during the Bay of Pigs invasion. While on the surface it may seem like his only honorable action, it was out of pure pragmatism, and it's shown that the two share mutual sadism, as Castro gives the captured Mason to Dragovich as a quote gift, with the only request being that Mason suffers tremendously. Dragovich then sadistically tells Castro that Mason will know suffering beyond measure, having big plans for Mason. So needless to say, his act of saving Castro was for self-serving means. And given the Cuban Missile Crisis happened the following year, he is indirectly responsible for that. And keep in mind, the Cuban Missile Crisis was the closest the world came to nuclear war. Dragovich was very uncaring, and given the existence of the numbers station, he very likely had a safe place to hide if nuclear war did break out. And he would have likely seen nuclear war as an opportunity rather than as something to be avoided. We see afterwards, alongside Steiner and Kravchenko, that they tortured and attempted to brainwash Mason, but Reznov sabotaged Dragovich's programming and managed to turn it against him. It is implied, however, that alongside Lee Harvey Oswald, Dragovich did indeed get Mason to be an accomplice to President John F. Kennedy's death in Dallas, Texas on the 22nd of November, 1963. Now, it's unknown if Mason, as a sleeper agent, did truly kill or assist in the death of John F. Kennedy, but I'm inclined to say that he actually did, as Dragovich himself hints this before Mason drowns him at the end of the game. And we know that Mason was present in Dallas, Texas the day JFK was assassinated. However, it's only strongly implied, but we do know for sure that it was fully Dragovich's plan to murder the President of the United States. So either way, Kennedy's death falls on him. I think the death of JFK also assists my point of Dragovich seeing nuclear war as an opportunity. Given the scramble in between Kennedy's death and Lyndon B. Johnson's ascendance to the presidency, could have had a rogue general fire missiles at the Soviet Union. Needless to say, Dragovich was likely an indirect detriment to the survival of the Soviet Union, ironically, given there's already 2 times he could have started a war, when he saved Castro and when he had Kennedy killed. So with that being said, Dragovich manages to cheat death by avoiding Mason and his allies, and actually manages to capture Mason again in Vietnam, and left him to be tortured by the Viet Cong, which resulted in the eventual death of Joseph Bowman and the near death of Frank Woods. By the climax of the game, Dragovich has been preparing to genocide the West with Nova 6, and when Alex Mason was absolutely ready to kill him, he showed absolutely no remorse, and even hinted that he got Mason to kill JFK, as alluded to earlier with the utmost glee, a display of absolute sadism. That's where Mason justifiably suffocated him to death via drowning, and after finally killing him, he was stopped, and Nova 6 was ceased. But his inflicted pain was undoubtedly still felt through countless sleeper agents, and if not for him, Petrenko and Reznov would have still been alive and likely serving the Soviet Union in the Cold War with utmost loyalty. So in the end, who was Nikita Dragovich? He was a psychopathic, untrustworthy commander who betrayed anyone he saw as loose ends, in his purely sadistic goal to genocide his enemies, not even seeing his own government or superiors as sacred, as he nearly caused all-out war at least 3 times, and presumably countless others off-screen. Dragovich lacked empathy or remorse, and stayed gleeful of his own atrocities. He was someone the world was better off without, as all the suffering he caused, or nearly caused, left long-lasting consequences, as his brainwashed sleeper agents persisted even after his death. And as seen in Black Ops 2, the sabotage programming still affected Alex Mason 20 years later. Nikita Dragovich, to put it bluntly, was the absolute, ultimate evil. Thank you for listening to this episode of Analyzing Evil. What do you think of Nikita Dragovich? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. I'm JJ Plagiarisms, and until next time, what are stories but mystery boxes?